Today, we're talking disasters and the end of the world. What kind of business would you want to own if you thought the world was coming to an end? Stay tuned. I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses while controlling risk. So if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it. Are you thinking of growing your business or beginning a journey into entrepreneurship? Take a shortcut to success by buying an existing and profitable business the right way. Visit businessbuyeradvantage.com and learn more about my online training, group coaching, and consulting services designed to help you win. All right. Since I came on YouTube years ago and started making videos, I've gotten questions from viewers out there. People leave questions in the comments down below. People will send me emails, comments on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., where they give me ideas about videos. And over the course of time, I have heard from people that have asked questions with respect to certain, call them end of the world type scenarios. And I've largely dismissed them, but I got one this past week, which basically was a question like, what kind of business should you own if you thought there was a likelihood of like a solar flare or something like this? And I started to think about it, and over the course of some early morning walks, I was just kind of thinking about this question and how it might really relate to day-to-day activity in the world of small business. And I realized, I have not made a video that talks about disaster preparedness in small business. And I think that it's actually something that people should be thinking about. In fact, in one of my books that I've written, 12 Things to Do Before You Consider Selling Your Business, I actually mention that having some kind of disaster preparedness plan is going to be seen in a very positive way by a potential buyer, right? And so let's talk about preparedness because I know there are programs on TV like that Extreme Prepper show that was out years ago. And I know that there's whole communities of people out there who are all about preparation. And I would say that being prepared is just an adult thing to do. I mean, even here, like here where I live, the government tells us that we should be prepared, to, for example, have power outage of 3 days or something like that, because it is actually a sure thing that this coming winter at some point I'll lose my power, right? There's going to be winter storms. We sometimes get the tail ends of hurricanes up here. And so if they're strong enough when they come through, they can be very damaging because we don't get them often. So older trees will get knocked over power lines and things like that. And we could go days without power. In fact, since moving into this house almost 10 years ago, I have gone, I think, 4.5 days without power on one occasion, and it was in the winter time. And because when I moved in here, I kind of thought about preparation and what would happen if we lost power for extended period of time, etc. I actually had made some changes to the way my furnace, which is a natural gas furnace, is wired into my panel, so that it would be fairly easy for me to run the furnace from a generator. And during that 4.5 day power outage, I was able to turn my furnace on 3 times during the day and just keep the house warm when a lot of my neighbors were starting to get pretty chilly after a few days. So I'm all for preparation in your home life and in your business. So let's talk about disaster preparedness because there are three different axes or spectrums that a disaster could fall upon that you might want to think about. So, for example, the size of the disaster. So, if you want to think about a spectrum, the size of the disaster could simply be your business is affected or the entire world is affected, right? So, I already mentioned, a solar flare of some kind, right? That's going to affect the whole world. Whereas a fire could affect just your business. I once had a client whose business was located in a strip mall. One of the neighboring businesses in the same building had some kind of accident and there was a fire and it destroyed their business too. And so that would be a very small size disaster that has a very big impact on one person's particular business. In the case of the fire, every business in the strip mall was affected, right? The second spectrum would be the size of the impact. So, what do you need to recover from? So, for example, if my house burned down, and this is where I run my business from, my computer would likely be destroyed. But because everything I do is virtual and online and it's all like backed up in cloud computing, I could just go to any store, buy a new laptop, log in through Google and Apple and all the cloud things that I use, and I'd literally be back in business, right? In fact, I once had a computer crash, which was a very real disaster for my business, and the computer became inoperable. And I thought that my whole week was going to be ruined. But in fact, all I did was I went to Staples, bought a new laptop, and I think within 2 hours, I was back to full speed, right? So the size of the impact, this would be at the low end. What's at the other end of that would be some kind of disaster resulting in the loss of capital equipment that would be difficult to replace. Um, so, for example, I once, in my capacity as a machinery and equipment appraiser, I helped a guy whose business had burnt down. A building was destroyed, but inside the building were several trucks that were parked in there, and they were completely destroyed. And not only did it mean that he had to go replace those trucks, but all of the customers he had that were relying upon him, he was related, it was a construction related business. All those other people had timelines. And all of a sudden, it was going to take him months to replace his gear. And so, in addition to trying to find new gear, he also had to scramble around and talk with competitors and stuff to try and get services arranged for these people that were relying on him. Because, of course, he wanted to maintain those customer relationships throughout the course of this disaster for his business. He didn't, just want to throw his hands in the air and say, I don't know, because he would have ended up losing customers in the long run, right? So that would be in the extreme. So the impact, very easy to get over, easily replaced stuff like buying a laptop versus significant capital equipment lost that might have to be replaced at great expense or might take a long time to find. Or in the absolute worst case scenario, something that is custom built, like if you had a specially built plant that got lost in a fire, earthquake, what have you, and it had to be built from scratch, right? You're talking years. And then the third spectrum would be the length of the disaster. So is the disaster something that is lasting days or hours, or something that lasts for years, right? And so if you think about, a hurricane, right? A hurricane is going to have a really big impact over the course of a couple days in one specific area. But then because of the locality of that, so if you think about Hurricane Katrina, for example, in New Orleans, lots of destruction and damage in New Orleans, and then the disaster is over, and then people can leave New Orleans and move to other places, and help and resources from outside New Orleans can come in to help rectify and remediate the damage, right? And so the length of time is the other thing. Are you going to have communication loss, power loss, loss of utilities? Is it going to be for a few days? Is it going to be for a few months? Right? All these things need to be considered. So when you think about these three different spectrums, the size of the disaster, the impact, and the length of time, you can then start to think about what are the likely things that could happen in your business, right? And your geography is going to play an important role in this, right? If you're in the down near Florida, you're going to be thinking about hurricanes more. If you're up here in the north, you're going to be thinking about ice storms, winter storms, etc. Um, Things like storms interrupting logistics, right? Delays in delivery of critical goods that your business needs, stuff like this. And then you can create a list. So, I've got a list here. Power outages, right, related to weather often, hurricanes, earthquake for some people. There was once a great media campaign in the 1990s. The government of British Columbia had these ads on TV about preparing for a zombie apocalypse. And then, the tagline at the end was because if you're prepared for zombies, you're prepared for anything. And of course, what they're really worried about in British Columbia is a big earthquake, right? Because they're on that Pacific Rim of Fire and they're due for a big earthquake. There's economic. So, loss of a major employer if you're in a small town. If you run a restaurant in a small town with a big mill or something, and a lot of the people in the town work in the mill, and that mill closes, that's an economic disaster that would be very difficult for that business to overcome. Fire, I've mentioned earlier, political. So there was a I was in Mexico briefly earlier this year, and they're doing an election there. And then I noticed that the government of Canada actually issued a warning to Canadians traveling in Mexico to avoid places where there might be like political rallies or something like this, because for whatever reason they thought maybe there's an opportunity for maybe something to happen during some of these events, right? So that would be a political threat. What if there were riots and your business was in that area and got affected by those riots? And we've seen that all over the place in the summer of 2020. There were riots all over the place. Those are certainly disasters for the businesses that were affected. So let me take a step back here because I want to talk a little bit about um, so the more local, the more precise, etc., that you can define these disasters, the remediation that you are going to have in your disaster plan is going to be pretty specific, right? Like everyone knows that there could be a fire, which is why most businesses would have some kind of insurance against fire, right? For a lot of these things, there are pretty specific remediations that you can make. For some of these things, there are not. So in general, a plan is going to be part of the remediation. So just thinking about what would we do if this happened, and then have a written plan with some kind of response. So if your business is located somewhere, maybe in a floodplain or a river delta that may flood, for example, and people have to go to work at your business, then maybe you have a plan that says at certain times of year, we're going to watch the weather. If it looks like there could be flooding, then this is the plan. These people have to go to the shop, they have to load this gear into these trailers. That maybe you need to buy an enclosed trailer as part of this disaster plan, right? So we're going to take these critical pieces of equipment, load them in the trailer, and then we're going to be able to then move to this other site that we've already scoped out. Maybe it's just a mini storage facility, but we know that if we get our critical equipment to the mini storage facility, we will then be able to have some kind of plan or be able to operate at a bare minimum level from that facility until any flooding recedes, right? So you're like creating a plan so that you say, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. It could be that you are going to, if it's an office, for example, it could be that you might say, we're going to move to uh, virtual PBX system for our telephone system so that we're not relying upon physical equipment in our office anymore. And if there is a flood that prevents us from accessing our office, we're going to bring all of the employees and we're going to go to a motel in, two counties over, and we're all going to be able to log in on our computers to our regular phone system, and we're still going to be able to operate and deal with our customers over the phone and in our regular form of business from a motel, right? We're going to stay in the motel together, and we're going to have the meeting rooms booked, right? So it's like a plan so that when things start to happen and all of a sudden there's danger, people aren't panicked saying, what are we going to do? So you want the plan, you want it written out for the most common kinds of disasters. And then the thing that is always going to be helpful in every kind of disaster, of course, is cash, right? So if you think that there are opportunities for these kinds of disasters to affect your business, then you're going to want to have some kind of savings, uh, extra financial resources that you can draw upon. Okay. So, what about we've been talking about things that may happen that we've all seen happen to other people. What about if these things are really big? You know, what if the disaster impacts the world? What if the disaster is very destructive? What if the disaster lasts for a really long time, right? Well, we have to get into discussing the sort of legal fictions that exist within our heads that are part of the structure of society. So, you know, I brought up the Katrina disaster in New Orleans. Uh, a person the day before the hurricane might have an outstanding credit card balance of $1,000, right? And so then the hurricane hits. And in the moments that you're in the storm, you're thinking about being safe, you know, getting out. Well, where am I going to get clean water, after the flooding happens, all that kind of stuff. You very quickly move down Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the very base elements of survival, right? Then the storm recedes, and then you can start to then move back up the hierarchy of needs. And so one of the things you're going to realize is, hey, maybe the place where I worked is now out of business, right? They didn't have a proper disaster plan. I can't go to work. How am I going to get the money to pay my credit card bill? Because you know that the disaster is going to come to an end. You know that people are going to come in and help the city. You know that you might be able to move to another city and get another job. You know that you are ultimately going to have to pay that credit card bill, right? It's intact. The fabric of society is intact. And so the larger and bigger the scope of these disasters, the less likely it's going to be that these sort of imaginary connections between people will continue. So let me give you an example. I mentioned political disasters earlier in the list of potential disasters that might affect a business. So think about the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So back in the 90s, Soviet Union collapsed. What happened? Well, one day there was a person who was like the manager of the factory, for example, the tire factory, went to work and got instructions from someone else, in Moscow saying, this is how many tires we're going to make today. All the workers would show up. He would pass along instructions to those people and they would make the tires. Well, one day there was nobody in Moscow anymore telling him what to do, right? And in that moment, what is that person going to do? They could either quit or choose a different path. And all the workers are showing up saying, what are we doing here? And, in the case of the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of those plant managers suddenly realized that they were the plant owner. How? Possession is 9/10 of the law, right? Like, quite literally, all of these sort of invisible systems, connections, et cetera, that keep society in order, a lot of that just disappeared, right? And very quickly, these people that were factory managers realized, hey, no one's going to be telling me what to do anymore. But these people that are coming here to work rely on me. I need to figure out a way to keep these things rolling. And then all of a sudden, they became the owners of the factory, right? Because they were in charge of it. So if there's a big enough disaster, it's going to be, what do I have control over physically, that is going to become the most important thing. So this is where we're going to turn and we're going to get into best businesses to own if you really think the world is going to come to an end. But before we get into this video, I'm going to hit pause so that I can go get into my Mad Max cosplay outfit. Yeah, there's no Mad Max cosplay outfit. Okay. So here are some of the things that I've got on this list for really big disasters. And I'm going to draw some connections here to fiction, right? Because obviously we haven't lived through a lot of this stuff. And so I've got on my list here like EMP. So a big EMP blast or pulse from the sun or something like that would destroy all electronics. So if all the computers stopped working, um, yeah, it would be a huge adjustment, right? I mean, there could be all kinds of problems that might happen from that. Um, my business would be out of business because all the computers would shut down, right? But all the logistics of getting food to the grocery store would also have a problem, right? So this would be a big thing. It would be felt by everyone, and people would have to get very resourceful very quickly. A solar eruption of some kind. So in the recent Tom Hanks film Finch, this is what they're describing, right? All of a sudden, the Earth's atmosphere wasn't able to protect people from the radiation and stuff from the sun. Plants were hurt, animals were hurt, society collapsed, lots of people perished, etc. Then there's sort of the zombie apocalypse narrative. Think of TV series like The Walking Dead. Then you've got things like the super flu from the Stephen King's The Stand, right? So if you think about that, really bad virus spreads really quickly. Lots of people pass on. You've got sort of the Mad Max scenario where there's a big war and lots of destruction. So a war, a big war between the superpowers would be number one, size of the impact. Your business versus the world, well, it'll affect the world. Number two, what is the impact on the businesses? Do you lose your space versus losing capital equipment? Well, we'd lose capital equipment, we'd lose highways, we'd lose railroads, we'd lose bridges, ports, like all kinds of stuff would be destroyed. The length of time, how long would this, sort of destruction last? Well, it'd be years to forever. So, I mentioned Mad Max, but this would also be that hit new series on TV, Fallout, right? Would describe this kind of future. Really, awful. Wouldn't want to be there. Environmental collapse is another one. So, there's a show that was on TV based on a book, I believe, called The Road, where it describes some pretty gruesome stuff for how people are going to survive. Um, and they kind of imply that there was some sort of environmental disaster that caused that. So in these kinds of really bad scenarios, you know, if you have a bank financing your line of credit at your business, and one of these kinds of scenarios happens, like no one from the bank's going to call. No one's going to worry about their credit card balance. Nobody's going to worry about their overdue tax bill, right? All of a sudden, it's going to become just like I described in the Katrina event. Everyone's going to go down to the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, and they're going to be worried about food, water, shelter, right, and security. And people who have access to the stuff that's going to provide that are going to be better off, right? So here's a kind of list of things that you should look for in a business if you actually believe that some of these things could in fact happen. So number one, you want a business with a large inventory of useful or tradable stuff. So what are the things that people are going to need at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy? They're going to need things that are going to be providing food, shelter, like clothing, security, ways to protect yourself, etc. You're going to want power options. So wherever the business is or however it's situated, you want the ability to create electricity or have stores of things like gasoline, diesel, etc. You want it to be a defensible kind of thing. So where is the facility? Where's the operation? Is it in an industrial park or is it like on the top of a hill with clear vantage points all around? There's other people out there who would be better expert at this than me. Um, in society in general, amongst humanity, how did we get to the point where everyone is so specialized and we are using these sort of imaginary systems to rely upon each other? It's the reason we got here is because trade benefits everyone. If people specialize and they trade with each other, everyone's going to be more productive. So even if one of these giant disasters were to occur, in the post disaster recovery, there is still going to be a a big incentive for people to be trading with each other, right? Some people are going to have certain skills and talents that other people are going to lack. And if there's trade, it's going to be good, which means if you can get back to some kind of monetary system of exchange, people are going to be better off. And so, what does that mean? Well, I'm also thinking that if you're going to buy a business specifically with a view to the end of the world, you might also want to have some kind of content or the ability to create some sort of commodity money, right? Things that will hold value that people will observe and be respectful of. So if you've ever watched a movie about, prison scenarios where kind of cigarettes become the money in the prison, this is what I'm talking about. So what could that be? Well, it could be things like bottles of whiskey, could be sugar, fuel, etc., right? And so if you have a stockpile of this stuff, then you can start to trade with other people, right? Now, a lot of this is kind of, you know, imaginary. I think a lot of people who go down this track kind of romanticize this kind of thing. Uh, I personally wouldn't want to live in any of these scenarios. It would be pretty awful. I like the world the way it is. But there is a TV series that came out about 20 years ago. It was called Jericho, and it was about a disaster where major cities in the U.S. were attacked and were destroyed. But the small towns were left intact. And so this one little town of Jericho was one of these places, and all of a sudden they lost their power and they lost the internet, they lost communication, and they were kind of left to fend on their own. And one of the overnight wealthiest people in town became the local shopkeeper, right? Because they had the stuff that people needed. And they went back very quickly to this barter and debt economy where people were trading things in, like someone had an animal die and they would butcher the animal and bring it to the shopkeeper, who would then in turn sort of sell the meat to the customers. And some people didn't have anything, so they were basically accruing debts to the shopkeeper that they would then have to repay through other doing other things down the line. And so it was an example of kind of what I'm talking about here, right? Now, the most profitable business ever ever known to mankind. In fact, it's so profitable that there are, in a lot of places in the world, the governments decide to own this business. And in a lot of other places, great lengths are gone to keep the reality of this business hidden from the public. What am I talking about? I'm talking about central banking, right? So, in our post apocalyptic world, if you happen to have a business that has thousands of gallons of diesel or a whole bunch of, I don't know, grain or other kind of commodity that people want, and you've got the wherewithal and ability to defend it, you could, for example, issue some kind of currency backed by that stuff, right? And if people believe that they can show up and get the commodity whenever they want it, just like back in the day, people knew they could bring a $20 bill in, you know, 1904, you could bring a $20 bill into an American bank and get an ounce of gold, right? If people had the same kind of faith in you and your business as people had back then in the banking system and the exchangeability to gold, then they'd be willing to take your little depository receipts and use them as money. And that would open the door to you having access to the most profitable thing of all, which would be fractional reserve banking. You could literally be the central banker of your neighborhood. Anyway, let's hope we never have to go there. All right. But for all the preppers out there who are watching, I thought it would be fun to make this video. And if you've got some ideas on what specific businesses these might be that I've described, please put them in the comments down below. I'm sure that there's a lot of fun that we can have with this one. Anyway, with that, I'm going to say see you later. And do make a disaster plan for your business. It is going to be important one day if you ever face any of these crises that we know happen, especially for some people that are in parts of the world where you get regular sort of natural weather-based disasters. You need to have a plan to know what you're doing. Anyway, see you later. If you want to learn more about buying a business, head on over to businessbuyeradvantage.com and check out all the ways that I can help you buy a business. Ciao. So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I've prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.